Story 1. Athena and the First Olive Grove. Long ago, when the land of Hellas had no marble temples and no stone cities, people lived in fragile huts and ate what they could find in wild forests and barren fields. The earth was dry, the sun burned mercilessly, and no one knew how to make it fertile. One dawn, the people saw a woman standing on a hill, clad in shining armor. It was Athena, goddess of wisdom and righteous war. She saw the wariness and fear in the people's eyes, their calloused hands, and the cracked soil beneath their feet. Then Athena knelt down and struck a rock with her spear. From the crack grew the first olive tree, slender, silver green, yet strong. Its branches rustled in the warm wind, its fruit filled with oil. People tasted the olives, pressed the oil, and discovered they could cook their food, heal their wounds, light their lamps, and trade oil for all they needed. Athena gave them not just food, she gave them hope and the first step toward civilization. Since then, Greeks have revered the olive tree as the goddess's gift, a symbol of peace and wisdom, and olive wreaths have crowned the heads of victors and sages alike. Story 2. Poseidon and the Lost Fisherman. In the days when the sea knew no ships with sails and only carried fragile boats on its waves, there lived an old fisherman named Antif. Every day at dawn he set out into the sea and returned by nightfall with his catch, feeding his family. One day a terrible storm rose. The wind tore his nets, the waves towered like mountains, and Antif's boat was lost among the black waters. Water flooded everything, and the stars vanished behind heavy clouds. The fisherman called out to Poseidon, Lord of all waters. Suddenly, from the depths rose a towering figure, a man with a long beard, glittering with salt water, holding a mighty trident. It was Poseidon. He looked at the trembling fisherman and calmed the storm with a single sweep of his trident. The waves fell silent, like sleeping whales. Poseidon reached into the deep, pulled out a pearl, and handed it to Antif. Take this treasure. Let it remind you, those who respect the sea protects. At dawn, the fisherman returned home. The pearl always lay on his table, and when he died, his sons told the tale to their children. Thus grew the faith in Poseidon's mercy and wrath. Story 3. Hephaestus and the First Flame. When the first humans wandered the earth, night was their enemy. Darkness brought cold, hunger, and the terrifying sounds of beasts. In one cave, deep in a wild forest, tribes gathered together. They huddled close, clutching their children, praying to the gods for light and warmth. Hephaestus, god of fire and the forge, heard their cries in his blazing workshop on Olympus. His hammer struck day and night, but his heart was kind, though his hands were rough. He descended into their cave, carrying in his palms a spark stolen from the heart of a volcano. He struck his hammer against stone, and before the people a fire was born. The flame warmed their bodies, drove away predators, and lit the cave's walls. In its flicker, the people saw their fears and knew they could conquer them. From then on, they learned to kindle fire, build forges, and craft tools, and Hephaestus became the eternal patron of craftsmen, a symbol that even the roughest hands can shape wonders for good. Story 4. Artemis and the Silver Stag. Deep in moonlit forests roamed Artemis, goddess of the hunt, the woods, and hidden paths. Her steps were silent, her bow and arrows always ready to protect creatures hunted for sport. One night, Artemis saw a group of greedy hunters corner a beautiful white stag, the last of an ancient line sung of in old songs. Its eyes shone like morning stars, its breath misted in the night air. Artemis crept closer, drew her bow, but not to kill. She cut the nets with her arrow and led the stag by hand into the deepest woods. There she laid her palm on its antlers, and they gleamed silver, catching the moonlight. "From now on, no one shall ever catch you," she whispered. Since then, travelers sometimes see a shimmering shape among the trees. The silver stag. They say if you glimpse it under the moon, Artemis walks beside you, guarding your path until you find your way back to the light. Story 5. Zeus and the Thunder Oak. In the heart of ancient Hellas stood a village at the foot of a hill. Atop the hill grew a mighty oak, ancient and vast, its roots so deep that people said it held the earth upon its shoulders. One day, black clouds swallowed the sky. Thunder roared all day, lightning struck all around, and the villagers prayed in fear to Zeus, king of the gods and master of storms. Zeus heard their prayers. He looked down at their frail rooftops and knew the lightning would strike their homes. So he guided the bolt to the great oak on the hill. The tree split from root to crown, but not a single house caught fire. At dawn, the people carved talismans and amulets from its fallen wood to carry as reminders that Zeus's wrath is mighty, but his protection is stronger for those who honor his power. Ever since then, each clap of thunder is not fear, but a sign that Zeus watches over humankind from Olympus. Story 6. Hermes and the Lost Child. At the edge of Arcadia, among cliffs and pine-covered hills, there stood a quiet village. There lived a boy named Timon. He was only 7, but already helped his parents gather berries and tend goats. One day, distracted by play, Timon wandered too far into the mountains. He didn't notice the sun begin to set or the trails begin to vanish. The wind picked up, and the forest turned strange, unfamiliar. Birds fell silent, shadows thickened. He called out for his father, but only the rustling leaves replied. Timon sat under a tree, pulled his knees to his chest, and cried. Far above, Hermes, the god of travelers, was listening. He sat at the edge of a cloud, hearing the music of the wind, when he felt a lonely heart calling to him. In an instant, Hermes descended. His winged sandals hovered just above the earth. His eyes sparkled with a mischievous kindness. He sat beside Timon and gently said, "You've lost the path, but found a moment. Sometimes, to find your way, you must simply stop and listen." Hermes touched the ground with his staff, and a faint glowing path appeared between the trees. Timon followed it, and soon he heard the voices of his parents calling. Before he vanished, Hermes left behind a small pendant shaped like a wing. Timon wore it for the rest of his life. He became a shepherd, and later an old man who told children this very story, and they all believed. If you ever feel lost, call out quietly, and Hermes will hear you. Story 7. Aphrodite and the Girl's Tears. By the shores of the Aegean Sea, where the waves kiss the rocks, lived a young woman named Calliope. She was gentle and kind, beautiful not in appearance, but in the quiet warmth that seemed to glow from within her. But in her heart lived sorrow. Her beloved, a warrior named Lycon, had sailed to war and never returned. Each evening, Calliope walked to the cliffs by the sea. She sat on the same stone, staring into the horizon. The place where the sky touched water. Sometimes she whispered to the waves. Other times she prayed to Aphrodite, the goddess of love. One night, as a storm stirred the sea, Calero came again. Wind tore at her hair, and tears streamed down her face, falling into the surf. And then the waves parted. From the foam rose a radiant woman, her skin glowing like dawn, Aphrodite herself. She knelt beside Calero and said softly, "You are loyal, not to a man, but to love itself, and for that I will leave a gift." Aphrodite touched the stone, and the next morning a rose bush had bloomed where the tears fell, its flowers soft pink, full of fragrance. Calero never wept again. She tended the rose bush, and those who touched its petals.
Story 8. Hecate and the Fires at the Crossroads. In southern Greece, nestled beneath forested hills, stood a village surrounded by 3 roads. At their crossing was an old stone covered in moss. People avoided it. They said strange things happened there. Whispers in the night, the sound of hoofbeats, though no beasts were seen. Then one year, true darkness came. The sky turned black, and stars disappeared. Even the moon seemed to hide her face. The villagers lit torches, but they sputtered out, illness spread, fear took root, and then a woman named Melina, a priestess, stepped forward. She carried 3 torches and walked alone to the crossroads. She planted the torches in the earth and cried aloud, "Hecate, guardian of paths and shadows, hear us." From the dark came a figure, tall and veiled in mist, with 3 faces and a crown of pale flowers. It was Hecate, goddess of the night and magic. She lifted her arms. The torches flared with blue fire. The wind drove back the clouds, and stars returned to the sky. The illness faded. Since then, the villagers placed offerings at the crossroads: honey, bread, candles. And when life led them to difficult choices, they whispered to Hecate, asking her to guide their feet through the dark. Story 9. Dionysus and a City Without Joy. On the slope of a mountain stood a city, walled and strict. Its leaders were proud of their silence, order, and rules. Laughter was frowned upon. Dancing was banned. Wine was considered dangerous. Life passed like clockwork. Children were quiet. Old men rarely smiled. One day, a traveler entered the city gates. He wore a dusty tunic and a crown of grapevines. He carried a flute, and his eyes gleamed like sunlight through red wine. It was Dionysus. He walked the streets, playing a tune, light and strange. At first, no one moved, but then a little girl tapped her foot. A young woman twirled. An old man set down his cane and began to sway. By nightfall, the whole city danced. People laughed and sang. Joy flowed like spring water through streets that had been dry for years. Dionysus stood in the center, smiling. He said nothing, and by morning, he was gone. But grapevines grew on the walls, and the scent of music lingered in the air. From that day on, once a year, the city held a festival, a day of wine and dance, in honor of the god who reminded them that joy is sacred. Story 10. Morpheus and the Philosopher's Sleep. Cleon was a philosopher. He lived alone in a house on the mountainside, surrounded by scrolls and silence. He knew the names of the stars, the nature of the elements, and the laws of every city in Greece. But Cleon could not sleep. Every night he lay awake, tormented by thoughts. He believed sleep
was the enemy of the mind. One night, utterly exhausted, he whispered into the dark, "If any god can hear me, grant me sleep, not as rest, but as meaning."
That night, a figure stepped into his room, a soft light behind him, wings as delicate as mist. It was Morpheus, god of dreams. He said nothing. He simply touched Cleon's brow with one hand. Cleon slept, and in his dream, he saw a garden, quiet, endless, full of light. No words, no questions, only peace. He felt truth in the silence. When he awoke, he smiled. He no longer feared sleep. He welcomed it, for in it lived a deeper kind of wisdom. From that day on, Cleon gave thanks to Morpheus and taught his students that not all knowledge comes from thought. Some truths you must dream to understand.